This is the Tabernacle Podcast with Jonathon Sherwin and me, John Vermilia. What's up, John? We've never had two Johns at the same
Johns
time.
At one time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I'm excited to be in here.
You excited to be here?
I am.
How much sleep did you get last night?
Not much.
Me neither. That's why I was a little delayed on the start, a little stuttering there. But Jonathon Sherwin is our Man Up speaker for 2025. And a friend of mine, if you've been following the Tabernacle Podcast, he was on episode 166, When God Can Use a Dog, or How God Can Use a Dog. And it was on that podcast that Pastor Adam Ray had said, hey, man, we got to get you up here.
Yep.
And that was all part of the plan. But it was sooner rather than later. And we're excited to have you as our Man Up speaker. But just by way of introduction, Jonathon is a husband. He is a father. He is a passionate follower of Jesus. And he is an itinerant, preaching with Forge, the same ministry that I'm part of. But he's also the lead pastor of Harmony Baptist Church.
Sir.
Did I say it right?
That's right.
And you are from deep in Mississippi.
Deep in Mississippi.
Tell me just a little bit about where you live right now, just to give people a little perspective.
Yeah, so I live in a place called Crystal Springs, Mississippi. And so with a southern accent, that goes out in like 7 syllables, right? Crystal Springs is right south of Jackson, the capital, probably about 35, 40 minutes south of there. And it's a rural Mississippi town. There's not much to it at all. I can't even, the demographics, like 20,000 people, I think, within, a 10-mile radius of that town. It's not just a huge town, but a lot of ag business, gravel.
Yeah.
People say Mississippi was built on Crystal Springs because it's nothing but gravel pits.
Oh, yeah.
It's known as the tomato capital of the world.
I didn't know that.
Yep, it's the tomato capital of the world, and so a lot of ag, a lot of loggers, farmers, things like that. So,
Well, you're on your home turf then.
I mean, yeah,
because we're here podcasting from Buckley, Michigan. There's a lot of ag. I've seen some gravel going down, and it sounds like the same type of people. You got a lot of outdoorsmen there? Oh,
tons.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's where we connected.
I think it's inbred, just in everybody.
It's just inbred, yeah. Well, God's been doing some amazing things at your church. There's also this, you're wearing an awesome hat, and I have one, a 6 Mile hat. Can you tell us real quick what that part of your ministry is as well?
Yeah, so me and my family, God was changing us in a season of our life. I'd been a pastor at a church for about 7 years, and just since the Lord was changing that direction. And so we just began to pray. And so me and my wife had like three options on the table that we were just praying through. Do we move to Texas and plant a church? Do we, go overseas and be missionaries? What do we do? And the church that I pastor now, Harmony, had called me several times throughout the years, wanting to know if I'd be, interested in potentially coming. And so I just sensed the Lord tell me to resign and trust Him, and I did. And my wife, I told her, I said, hey, Harmony called again. Just what do you think? She said, well, let's pray about it. And it's the first time really we've told anybody we'd pray about it. And long story short, I was at work. I was bivocational at the time. I was at work, and I get a text message from my wife, and she'd been on Realtor.com. And so I've got 3 kids, and so she pulled up 4-bedroom houses on Realtor.com, and the first thing that pulled up was a camp. It was an old, rundown kids camp, and I looked at it, and I was text her back. I said, no, that's not going to happen right there. I'd rather, spend my time in a nursing home preaching to people there than with kids at a kids camp. And one day I was leaving work. I was working in a different building. I was headed home, and I passed this place. It was a camp called Camp Wintover, and I passed it, and it's in the middle of nowhere, Copiah County. And so I got home, and I told my wife, I said, you'll never believe I passed that camp today. It's in the middle of nowhere. And long story short, I could talk hours about it, but just through dreams and visions and confirmation of his word, over, 6-7 month period, God just began to work in our hearts, opened up the opportunity after we had made an offer that they didn't accept, to say, perfect. If God's closing this door, he's closing this door. And one day he opened the door and we walked through it. And so now 6 Mile is a fully functional year-round camp. We tailor to lease groups, churches, organizations,
Wow.
inner city, organizations that minister to drug rehabilitation centers, just you name it, the gamut's there. And so one of the things that we began to talk through, the reason it's 6 Mile is I'd started really through my journey of being a Christ follower, of learning what it means to persevere. And we sat and began to pray, what do we call this place? And the thing that kept popping up in our mind was the place of perseverance, the place of perseverance, the place of perseverance. And so we sat and talked, me and my wife, and I said, 6 is the number of incompletion, 7 is the number of completion, and we're not there yet, and we never will be until we're glorified before God.
Wow.
And so let's call it 6 Mile, the place of perseverance. We're on a journey. We're not to the 7th mile, but we're persevering. And being incomplete, in and of ourselves.
We're in process.
We're in process of sanctification, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we called it 6 Mile.
Man, I gotta get out of bed earlier just to keep up with you. So you're leading a church. You are an itinerant. Besides the husband and the father and all the other things, and you own a Christian camp, and own an opera. Own sounds a little worldly there. You have this other ministry as well. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I want to go there.
Come on, let's go.
Someday I'll be, right now when I wear my 6 Mile hat, it's just because of my friend. But one day I hope to see the place because, and maybe we'll do a podcast on that sometime.
Let's do it.
Yeah, because I've heard you share some of the stories you didn't share. It's just about how
it
God
would
provided,
take,
and
it would take hours.
Yeah.
Just to see the faithfulness.
Because
the
in
faithfulness
ministry,
of God, the faithful hand of God.
You don't have that kind of money laying around, and God's got to provide. So,
yeah. Well, when Scripture says that He truly owns everything, and He makes the things that He's called you to known through meeting needs financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's just the faithful hand of God. You just see Him at work and go, okay, God, this is yours. And so we're technically by, organization, owners, operators, president, vice president, whatever, but if we're just being honest, He owns it all. We're just stewarding it for the time that He's given us the opportunity to do it. And so we put a lot of work into it. It was all open aired cabins whenever we moved there, buzzards and rats and coons living there and everything. And now, man, over a process of a few years, it's all closed in. It's, posh in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. And so it's sweet.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, what we want to look at today is when this podcast comes out, men will be coming back from our Man Up retreat. We've had some guys that don't like it being called a retreat because they're like, we're men of God, we don't retreat, we go forward, but it's a retreat. It's a time when God's going to do some cool things. And what we'd like this podcast to serve as is whether someone's gone away on a retreat or like you, just recently back from the Holy Land, your first visit there. I don't want to get us on too far on that bunny trail, but God provides these mountaintop experiences, to use the kind of the Christian vernacular, where, Moses back in the Old Testament, he went to the mountaintop and met with God. Just him and God alone. The Scripture says he spoke to God as a man speaks to another man face to face. He didn't see God's face, but he spoke to him that way. But whatever the mountaintop experience, that place of, man, the Lord moved, or the Lord convicted me, or man, a guy's trying to tell his wife, it was so great, I can't even kind of put it into words. The problem is we come back from these events, you have to come down off the mountain.
Yeah.
And then you find that the same you that went up to the mountaintop is the same you that came down off the mountain. And so whether it's men coming back from the men's retreat, or students coming back from a student retreat, or just any type of missions trip, whatever, what I'd like you to share with us is, from your perspective, what are some things that I need to keep in mind to help me as I come down off that big experience? Because I don't know if you've experienced this. First of all, the missions trip, the Holy Land trip, the retreat, you can't even put it into words. I mean, when my kids came back from their massive student ministry retreats, which are amazing here at our church, my wife is like, don't pepper them for too much information, because I want to know everything, what happened,
yeah.
And so I've kind of given up on that. I just go visit, try to stay out of the way. But I'm talking about those deeper places in our hearts. So you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So what would you say to someone that's gone through that? Like, how would you coach them up?
Yeah, one, I think you said it perfectly. We're never meant to stay on top of the mountain. Man, this life is a journey of ups and downs and everywhere in betweens. And I think that's the beauty of me, especially in ministry as it relates to men, of just, 6 Mile, the place of perseverance, right? God's called us to persevere through this thing we call life. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not easy, but regardless, you're not meant to spend your life on a mountaintop. Matter of fact, if you want to pretend you're always on the mountaintop, you're going to be fake, because we're never on the mountaintop. I've heard it said this way: whether it's a retreat, whether it's a conference, whether it's a revival, or just a Sunday morning sermon, one of the things that I've heard, hey, not every message is meant for every person, but there's something in every message for every person.
Right.
And so whenever you're there, say for these guys that are part of, this retreat, there's going to be something that God breathes into you. It's something. It may not be the whole thing. It may be one specific thing that God is going to breathe into you. And so one of the first things I would say, as you retreat, as you get away, as you listen to a sermon, regardless of whatever it is, wherever it's at, own what the Lord's going to breathe into you.
Own what the Lord's going to bring into you. Yeah.
Own it. Own what the Lord is going to breathe into you. Whether it's conviction, whether it's some type of admonishment, whether it's some type of encouragement, whether it's some, regardless of whatever the Lord breathes into you, own it. Don't white knuckle it. Don't push it to the side. Don't try to man up over it. Be sensitive to what the Lord is going to breathe into your life. And then here's why I would say that. One, because moments that I've allowed the Lord to speak into my life, to breathe into my life, are some of the most defining moments for me being the man that God's called me to be. But I've had to own that, not just let it go in one ear and out the other, to truly embrace it and own it. I've done a lot of these. I probably, speak at 5 retreats a year, and at least, most primarily for men. And one of the things that I see with men is it becomes about a weekend, and then you get back to normal, and it's like, well, that was a good feeling. Well, it can be a feeling, or you can let the truth of the Holy Spirit that's breathed into your life change you, right? So for me, one of the things that I had to own, I was at a men's retreat, and
speaking or before?
Before.
Okay.
Before. And I've seen this happen time after time. I was probably been married 5 years. Marriage was not great. Young, got married whenever I was 21, me and my wife both. And 4 days after I turned 21, I got married.
Wow.
And so, welcome to Mississippi.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Hey, I did too. So
barefooted,
yeah.
With the pigs out back. And so, anyway, I had struggled for a while in a relationship and with another guy that was close to my wife when they were in high school. And whenever I kind of swept her away, it caused some friction in between me and this guy who liked my wife. I'm talking about petty stuff, you know what I mean? But I get to this retreat, and this had been years and years and years since that had happened. But I still had some type of hatred in my heart towards this guy. Didn't like him, hated him.
He's not a threat, but he's the enemy. Yeah.
And so I walk in, and lo and behold, who's the first person that I see?
Whoa.
That guy. And I went, I said, Lord, you got a sense of humor, to bring me here and for me to see that guy. And as soon as I saw that guy and I made that comment, the Lord breathed into me, Jonathan, you can't be the man that I've called you to be until you learn how to forgive people.
Oh.
And one of the things that he revealed to me even in that moment is what just him. It was others. It was some of my own family. It was things that I had built up over my life for years, since I was a little kid even. But when the Lord breathed that statement into my life, Jonathan, you can't be the man that I've called you to be until you learn how to forgive, I had to own that. I couldn't let that go in one ear and out the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it sounds like that had nothing to do with what the retreat was about.
Nothing.
Speaker hadn't spoken, a guy hadn't played a thing on a guitar, you hadn't done any, but you knew that was God speaking to you.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think that's just being sensitive to the Lord and what He's doing in your life and what you believe that He's calling you to do with your life. But for instance, just in that moment, that's where it began. But the very first message that I heard was on priority. And it wrecked me. I could have left after that and gotten everything that I felt like I needed, through that weekend. And long story short, just from the priority of being the man that God's called me to be, to growing in the man that God's called me to be, to finally looking at this guy and verbally telling him, hey, I can't be the man that God's called me to be until I forgive you. And I didn't feel like I did anything wrong.
No.
I felt like I was the one that needed to be forgiven,
right.
Receive forgiveness. Anyway, but through that, God began a great work just in my life, in my ministry, within my family, and but I had to own it because...
Was it easy to forgive that guy? Or was it easier with some and not others? I know that's not one of the things you're going to share, but while we're there, what did that look like for you?
It was easy because I didn't feel like there was any hostility there anymore.
Okay.
I talked to a lot of guys. Like we had a thing Wednesday night with 70 guys, a little over 70 guys at our church, through a thing we're doing called Better Man.
Yeah,
and
great program.
I can't tell you how many people were there. And we were talking about father wounds in particular, and how many guys there was like, man, I haven't forgiven. I haven't forgiven my dad. I haven't forgiven my ex-wife. I haven't forgiven, I still am mad and bitter and angry. And I wasn't there at that place anymore. But here's what did happen. Because I owned what God called me to do a few years later, this same guy, I felt like I got hurt pretty bad by him. And it was just like the Lord again breathed into my spirit. Hey, if you forgave him once, do you think you can do it again?
Wow.
Because I've forgiven you way more than once. And so I think it's taking ownership of just what the Lord is breathing into you. And that may look different. Like it's happened for me different ways than just that, whether owning. I was at a conference September 2013. I remember the date because it was one of the most defining moments in my ministry. I was in Branson, Missouri at a Timothy Barnabas conference, and the pastor says at this conference, he said, and I was a pastor at this time, he said, hey, pastor, if you're not preaching on overflow, you're not preaching. Well, it may not mean anything for anybody else in that room.
Yeah.
But for me, I was a bivocational pastor. I was working, 50 to 70 hours a week. And that was every week, preaching, trying to be a husband and a daddy. And here's what, I was not good at any of them. And so what I did,
because you were running on empty.
I was running on empty.
Yeah.
And so what I was doing is I was reading and preparing always for the next message. That was it. Just reading and preparing always for the next message. And so when that guy said that, the Lord breathed into me, hey, Jonathan, you need to quit studying for the next message, and you just need to get up close to me. And so I made a commitment September 2013. You know what, Lord? I'm going to wake up every morning and spend time with you. And I was already convicted about it because I'd wake up and get ready and go to work just in time every single morning. I mean, if I could sleep to 6 o'clock and wake up and be at work by 7, hey, great, perfect. But when I would wake up, my wife would be on the couch reading her Bible. And after he said that and I saw it, I just got convicted. And I said, you know what? That's not what I'm doing. I'm growing, I feel like it, but I'm not preaching out of overflow. I'm just preaching out of habit, trying to get something out, not to entertain people, I wouldn't say that, but to preach in a way that, that there would be something that would happen within all of us. But that's not what the Lord required of me or you or anybody else. The first thing that he calls of us to, Mark chapter 13, is to be with him.
Yeah.
And so that was conviction. And so I would tell you from September of 2013 to today in 2025, I bet I haven't missed just spending a day with God, just through his word, asking him to grow me a handful of times.
Wow.
But I had to own it.
Wow. So we got people that'll be at a retreat or, again, whatever it is, the conference, the missions trip, the big spectacular event. And God's always speaking. And I've said that it seems to me that God won't give you the next thing until you do the last thing he told you. So if you sense him speaking and he's breathing something into you, whether it's conviction, whether it's encouragement, whether it's, that moment of feels, when you got the feels and you knew it was for you, if you try to ignore it and then you go looking again for, Lord, give me a word, give me an encouragement, answer this prayer, what have you. God doesn't say, okay, forget about that thing.
Yeah.
Here's a new thing. And if I ignore that voice over and over and over, the next time he's just going to say the same thing or something related to it, because he's in charge of this process. Yeah. He knows that I'm a 6 and I'm not a 7, to use the 6 mile analogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so owning what the Lord has breathed into you or is going to breathe into you, or the thing that he said, that thing that was for you, own it, take responsibility for it. If there's repentance that needs to take place, then you repent. If it's just confirmation. I mean, I've been in events where, Lord, what was it for me here? And God's met me in some of the deepest places of my soul when it was like, no one else thought that speaker was even that great. Yeah. But there was something that he said or the way that he said it where I sensed the Lord saying, yeah, that was for you, buddy. Little camper, little cow. It's time to cowboy up again and keep going and living off of that, that little fill up, that little extra boost that I got. You can own it in that way too. Yeah. I would think.
And number 2, I just to follow along with that, and you pretty much said this, if I own what the Lord is going to breathe into me, then I need to make a commitment to change, right? A commitment to let the Lord, what he breathes into me, a commitment to let him change me and grow me through it. Whether that is some type of conviction, whether it's some type of, exhortation that is breathed into you, regardless of whatever it is, I need to commit. It's like, for me, all right, I own September 2013. For me, I just couldn't say, okay, Lord, you're right. I had to make a commitment And so a commitment looked like for me, you know what? Whenever I get home, I'm going to set my alarm 30 minutes. And in that commitment earlier, and in that commitment, what I found out is I needed more than 30 minutes. And so I made a commitment to set my alarm for an hour earlier. And then what happens in the commitments that we make, it becomes a natural habit within our life. You know, I needed to make a commitment to forgive. Well, it just didn't need to just own it. I needed to commit it to do it. And not just once, but 70 times 7, regardless. Why? Because in making a commitment, you see the faithfulness of God and what he's breathed into you work within you, right? Just because God breathes something within you doesn't mean you're going to see that to completion. I don't think.
Yeah, it isn't like this magical forgiveness wand that he waved over you.
Until you actually commit to it. And just you saying that, I'm reminded of Hebrews, first part of Hebrews, 4 different times. The Bible says, if you hear my voice, do not harden your heart as they did in the rebellion. You know, it's this picture that, hey, God's speaking. He's trying to breathe. And today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. And the picture is that there's a person on a fence and they're straddling the fence. And in an Old Testament perspective, he's using the wilderness generation to describe this. In an Old Testament perspective, he's saying, and from New Testament with the Old Testament analogy, he says, hey, it's like straddling the fence. And when everything's going good, you're saying, hey, I believe in this Jesus guy. When everything's bad, you're going, oh no, I need to get back to the comfortability of Judaism. And what the writer is saying, you need to quit straddling the fence. You need to commit one way or the other, but don't straddle the fence. And in that commitment, when we get off the fence and quit straddling what the Lord's trying to breathe into us, I 100% believe you see the hand of God begin to work in supernatural ways, holy ways.
It seems to me that that's where the rubber starts to meet the road. Is owning it is step one. I mean, really, we're doing a 3-point message here. I didn't even realize that, but that commitment to change, that's where we struggle. What are some practical tips on how to make a commitment to change? Because we both work with people as pastors in churches, and I've seen people make commitments and break them. Or I'll hear a story. Usually what I'll hear is, I've sensed God was saying that to me, and so then I wanted to change, but then after a week or two, it just kind of fell away.
You hear it all the time.
Like, how do I just kind of drive that bolt down so with a lock nut that, it's really going to happen? Like, what are just some little things that we can...
Yeah.
I know in my own life, like I've made commitments even at the conferences. I'm thinking back to a teenager, okay, from now on, this is going to be different, or that's going to be different, or I'm changed. And I haven't really changed yet because I haven't really committed to the change. And there might be practical things that we could do that will help us, this is the word people don't like, will keep us accountable to that change.
Well, I think that's one of the things you need the most. So you hear it say in this society, commitments are meant to be broken.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they're easy to be broken. Now, commitments for all things, kind of like you said, hey, I committed to this, but I really didn't see it through. Just think about the state of marriage. That's a commitment that you make with somebody, but 60% of the guys that I deal with come from split homes, including me. And because of that, many of them have replicated what they came from, even though they made a commitment to, be with somebody.
I'm going to be different.
Hey, I'm going to be different, right? Even though they made a commitment. And so lots of times commitments they're easily broken. But in the commitment from the standpoint of a biblical perspective, it's full surrender, right? It's bowing the knee. It's full surrender. It's that pisteuo Greek word belief, right? That I bow the knee, I hold on to, I don't let go of. And for that to happen, for you to have full surrender and a commitment to let the Lord change you and grow you, you have to be with Him. You cannot do it alone. You first have to be with Him. But in that, you can't isolate yourself from the body. And every great work that the Lord did involved people. It wasn't just one singular person. It was a group of people. You'd say, well, there's, Stephen, or there's a Peter, or there's a Paul, or there's a Timothy. Yeah, but every single one of them had a group of people around them. They had accountability. Even Paul, Peter, whether, it was John Mark or whoever it was that would be a part of their journey, they were going to have somebody with them that would hold them accountable. And then every church, for instance, Paul, every church that Paul planted, within the life of those churches were people. You have to be involved with people. There has to be accountability. Why else would Scripture say, as iron sharpens iron, so
Right.
one sharpen another? We need people. And we live in a society where it's easy to come home, isolate ourselves from people.
Doom scroll.
Doom scroll.
Netflix.
All this other stuff, and isolate ourselves from the very people that God's called us to be with. And I would even go as far, and some people would argue with me, but I would even go as far as to say Christ didn't die for you individually, although he did. Christ died for the church. Go read Ephesians 5. Christ died for the church. And the church is a group of people, individual members of it. It's a body of people. And I think God has called us to be so in tune with the body because he knows we need it. I need you.
Yeah.
You need me. We need each other. And the people that have helped me the most in my commitments are the guys that I've been the closest to. Old guys, younger guys that, man, I've walked, they've discipled me, I've discipled them, because if I go to a retreat, I'm going to come home and I'm going to say, you're going to say, hey, how was that retreat you went to this weekend? Man, it was good. But what happened? Man, God breathed into me this. Well, if you know that, and you see I'm not embracing that or committing to that, it's easy for you to say, hey, you remember when you were at that retreat?
Yeah.
And we need that. We need that accountability. And so part of it in surrendering and committing, and I think we could keep on going on this, but a practical thing is find you another brother that you trust, that will hold you accountable, that like personalities, things that you can do together, enjoying each other's company, and truly build a friendship and a fellowship that far exceeds anything, from a worldly perspective that it has to offer.
You got to say it. You got to say it out loud. What he breathes into you, say it to, or you got to tell somebody. You say it out loud. Then it becomes more than just me and Jesus, me and just my little personal relationship. I think that's beautiful. And I've seen it happen. I'm thinking right now of a friend of mine who I'm in a fight club with. And just a couple weeks ago, we've been going through this study of Revelation. And there's two thoughts that popped in my mind. First, on the issue of accountability, there was something in the study from the message, and it was about heaven and hell. It's all apocalyptic literature, and guys were sharing how it applied to them. And it came to him, and he said, my faith journey's just been about me. And it's a unique situation where he's been coming to church, and it's just easier for his wife to not, for his wife and his young children to not. And with tears, he's like, that's it. He goes, I'm saying it out loud in front of you guys. He goes, when he worships, he didn't like to even sit with anybody. It's just, it's so intense, and he's following Christ, and things are changing in his life. But what might seem elementary to other people, he was missing. What about my wife? What about my kids? And he's like, this weekend, I will be in church. He goes, my wife, I can't control what she does, but my sons are coming with me to church.
That's owning it.
He owned it, and then he said,
breathed it he breathed it out himself, and
he said the words,
it.
I need all of you guys. If you don't see me on Sunday with my sons, he goes, I need to be called out. And then, he said some other things that were hilarious. The very next Sunday, he was there with his whole family.
Wow.
His whole family. And it happened. And there was rejoicing. That was huge.
You know what I think that is, though, John? I think that's a man's man.
Yeah.
I think that's a biblical man right there. And our definition of manhood is skewed so bad.
That I can do it alone.
That's a man.
I can pull it or myself up by my own bootstraps, which is impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. The second thing that came to my mind is at our most recent Fight Club, this would have just been last night, we were talking about this picture of heaven. And we were diving into all the questions that we have, what kind of bodies are we going to have? What's it going to look like? And there's so much of that is unknown. But where we landed is that it will be a place of intimacy that we will have with God and with one another.
Wow.
That, you were talking about Christ died for the church, the bride of Christ, the New Jerusalem that comes out or down from heaven, and the dwelling place of God will be with man. But it's not just me and God. It's me, God, and you.
Yeah.
And all these countless billions who through the ages have died in faithfulness to Christ. And so if that's a picture of eternity, this wonderful place of perfect relationships with no jealousy, no pain, no crying, no tears, mourning, where we're not hurting one another or hurting others, that's something we need now, and speaks to God's desire not only for relationship with us, but for us to have relationship with one another with Him.
Yeah.
And so,
that needs to start now.
Yeah.
And you've heard it said. I've heard it said this, man. If you can't do it now, you're going to have a hard time doing it later.
Yeah.
Which speaks to you probably won't be doing it later.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's powerful. I mean, to really flesh it out. So own it. Make a commitment to change.
Yep. And I would say third, this make it a priority continually. Right. It's not just letting God breathe it in once. It's not just committing to it for a season. I think part of perseverance at the core is you make it a priority continually. And over time, you see God do God stuff. For me, as I heard a guy, he's an NFL guy, his name's Malcolm Taylor, and played for 12 years with the Raiders and the Houston Oilers back in the day, defensive tackle. He was, big, tall, 6'5", skinny guy, and he went to Tennessee State, was a unbelievable ball player. Now he'll tell you, I'm 6'5", 300, none of your business. That's what he'd tell you now. But Malcolm's a great friend of mine, and I heard Malcolm talk about priorities, and one of the things that he was saying one day, talking about priorities, he had us to do this, and a lot of people had done it before. And he said, "Hey, I want you to write out on a sheet of paper 5 things that mean so much to you." So I had, my family, my work, the outdoors, hobbies, things like that, church, and I had, I can't remember, something else on there. And he said, "Hey, if you could do without one of those things, which one would you do without? If you had to do without one of those things, which one would you do without?" And so I'll mark it off. Well, you get down and there's only one left.
Oh, you mean he keeps doing it?
Oh, yeah, all the way down.
Okay, now the next one.
Now the next one. Now the next one. What if you had to live without one of those things, what would it be? And mine was my family, but at the end, which isn't the right answer, by the way, but they are a huge priority in my life. And the whole thing was, he says, well, that's what has mastery over your life. Your family, that's your priority. And your family is not a bad priority, right? But here's where it stuck me. As I wrote that out, church was a priority. And the conviction that the Lord breathed over me was not that my family was a bad priority. The conviction that was breathed over me was church was a priority before Jesus was a priority.
Whoa.
And so I realized I was basically living checklist religion, at the time, of where, I did church. I did this. I did that. And I heard a guy, his name is Vance Pittman, he said it this way. He said, being a Christian is not doing anything for King Jesus. Being a Christian is letting Jesus live his life in and through you. Mm. And if he's not a priority of my life, then he's not going to live his life in and through me. I'm going to be doing things for Jesus, which is not Christianity at the core. It's Jesus living his life in and through me. And so when Malcolm got to that end, it had nothing to do with what he was trying to get out. But in it, God said, hey, you've made my church a priority over me a priority. Mm. And so in making it a priority and what God breathes to us and, the commitments, the surrenders we make through it, one of the things that I've learned is priority, it is a huge part of the perseverance of our life as being Christ followers. Mm. And here's why. Because it's easy for me, I say it this way all the time, it's easy for me to wake up, go to work, make some money, pay some bills, eat some food, go to sleep, and do it all over again the next day.
That's right.
Like, listen, It's easy for me to wake up, go to work, make some money, pay some bills, eat some food, go to sleep, and do it all over the next day. But life is so much more than waking up, going to work, making some money, paying some bills, eating some food, going to sleep, and doing it all over the next day. Because if it's all it is waking up, going to work, making some money, paying some bills, eating some food, going to sleep, then that is a boring, miserable, checklist life, and that's not living a life full of meaning and purpose whatsoever.
Well said.
But how many people that wake up,
it's the treadmill,
go to work, make some money, pay some bills,
and it
eat
can
some
be
food,
the same in ministry.
Same thing. Yeah. And so if he is not a continual priority for my life, him, period, then what he breathes into my life and what I've committed to and what he's breathed in my life will take a back seat to waking up, going to work, making some money, paying some bills, eating some food, going to sleep, and waking up to do it all over again the next day. And so it has to be a continual priority in our life to get away from the mundane checklist life that we're so accustomed to, because that's what the world's fed us. Life is so much more than that. And I can't live the life of meaning and purpose that he's called me to and what he's breathed into my life and what I've said I'm going to commit to and surrender to unless I make him a continual priority within my life.
Wow. So would you share with us what's your priority list look like now? Like what's the top 3 or 4, just whichever one's like after he breathed that, and you've obviously made it a commitment because you're passionate about it. I can hear it in your voice. And we've talked about the treadmill before. So what's priority number 1? Have you already told us?
I haven't. Yeah, priority number 1 for me is the Word, period. Everything that I do, everything that I teach and how I preach and how I try to lead our church and is the Word. I want to be committed to the Word and not just reading the Bible. There's several things that we teach our people at Harmony, and I teach a lot, and even these guys will hear it this weekend. If Jesus is the master teacher, I need to be the master student. One. And so he's known as master teacher, right? Teacher. So whenever the disciples would come to him or he would meet people, what would they call him? Teacher. Yeah. And so if he's the master teacher, and he would teach. Yeah. And so if he's the master teacher, I need to be the master student. Number 2, I heard Jeremy Kingsley say it this way. He said, I don't read the Bible to finish, I read the Bible to change. Because if all I do is to read the Bible to finish, then I'm truly never going to really change. And so whenever we read through the Word, one of the things that I want our people to embrace is not the finish aspect of it, but the change aspect of it. And so through that, hey, what did you hear? What is a highlight that God's breathed into you in reading? Would you explain it in context? Not to take it from a feel-good perspective and take it out of context because you received it wrong, but in context, explain why that would be a highlight for you. And then how can you apply that passage to your life? And so if God speaks this, it's highlighted in your heart, explain it in context. How then can I apply it to my life? And then just naturally, in a response, a commitment, say, okay, here I am. I'm going to give this to you. You know, I want you to grow me. I want you to change me. And I'm going to commit to let you do that. And so for me, the word is a huge priority in my life. You know, I wake up, I read, I spend time with the Lord. It's easy to get busy and to go through the motions. And so I have to commit to it. And if I do miss, I had a buddy, told me this one time, because it's such a priority for me. If I miss, I feel like, man, doggone, I let the busyness get to me today. I failed. Whenever you feel like you're a failure, it's hard to pick back the pieces up, so to speak, and you go like, oh man, how am I going to do this? And he looked at me one day and he said, Jonathan, I used to beat myself up all the time for things that I didn't do. He said, but there's grace for that. He said, there's grace for it. Quit. Just get back in now. Go. And so for me, just the word and leading people in the word, my family walking in the word. Like, I text my family, we text each other, together as a dad. I feel like that's a huge priority. If my family is going to be my priority, then how are they going to be my priority? Just me being their daddy or a spiritual leader of my home?
Wow.
That's priority. So the priority of the word, my fellowship with the Lord himself in those moments translates into everything else that he's called me to prioritize. My family. My family's over the church. My church knows it fully. Like, hey, I love y'all, but my family comes first. And it becomes, between y'all and them. It's them every time.
Right.
I love my faith family. Man, they are gracious and merciful and slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. They're the character of the Lord to me. And but they know that. And here's why. Because if something happens to me tomorrow, they're going to have a new preacher Sunday lined up to come and preach.
That's right.
They're going to start a search, but who's going to be without? My family.
That's right.
So how do you get there? Priority with the Lord and his word and fellowship with him. Lead me to live out Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Shema, to the best of my ability before my family. Lead me then in my church to live out Acts 2:42, being devoted to apostles' teaching, to fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayers. Like, how do you get to that priority? I would just tell you this. If he's not first priority, you're not going to live out any other priority well.
Well said. Yeah. And that's something that you and I share deeply, is just a love for the word, a commitment to the word. It's also why you're here this weekend. I've actually warned our guys. I was like, or at least my staff guys, I was like, I don't know any other preacher that uses more of the word when he preaches the word. And you don't have to live up to that. But every time I've heard you preach, when I heard you preach at Deep Camp, when I've watched some of your messages online, when you were first coming on with Forge, I was like, I love this guy because this guy loves the word. It oozes out of you. But you don't have to be a preacher to do that. You can be a guy, I think sometimes culture, churches in particular, and this is for another podcast, but I'll just go on a rant here just for a second. We focus too much on developing leaders. This person's got to be a leader, and that person's got to be a leader. We get someone in, and they start to grow, and then we want to make them into this leader. And then so if you're not a leader, then somehow you're not measuring up. And the fact is we're all called to lead, but we're called to lead ourselves first.
Yeah.
Or to let Rabbi Jesus lead us. You can't be a good leader if you're not a good follower. It starts with you and him. And you may be in that grind and never called in any sort of vocational ministry or to be the big team leader at whatever church you're a part of, but you can still be a leader within your family and let Jesus lead you and be faithful to his word and to be people of the word that are constantly being changed by his word and be faithful to what God has called you to do.
Yeah.
You have a vocation outside the church and you're a faithful part of that church and you're in a group and doing all those things. this is available to all. And we live in a country where it's available to all.
Everybody.
You're the master of your own schedule, even if you've got a 60-hour week job. It's setting the alarm a little bit earlier or whatever your rhythm is, however it fits. If there's a commitment, you're going to make it a priority, and it's going to be a continual priority. And I've never seen God not show up over time when people are committed to the Word. Never seen him not show up in deep ways to people that commit to that. So, that's strong.
I think one of the things that we're missing within the church is over years, you've made it about a personality at a pulpit more than you have the people, within the church.
Yeah.
And the reality is the ministry of the church does not belong to the pastor. The ministry of the church belongs to the people. And the pastors, literally, just one of the things that God's taught me is I have a spiritual gift, but my spiritual gift does not trump anybody else's spiritual gift within the church.
Preach.
And together, our spiritual gifts are meant to culminate the ministry of his church, right? Of his church. And so the ministry of the church belongs to the saints of the church, the people of the church, together in our spiritual giftednesses. And so within that,
isn't that Ephesians 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, that God gave the apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists, whatever, to equip the saints
for the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
The ministry belongs to the church, not the pastor.
I'm not a Rick Warren fanboy.
I'm not either.
Yeah. But hey, I'll take wisdom wherever I hear it. You know what he said years ago when he stood up in front of his church and announced to them, I'm officially retired from the ministry. People thought he was leaving, and because they were on Ephesians 4. And he said, I've been doing this wrong. And I didn't hear the whole message. I just heard the little quote and the hubbub around it. Is he was saying, this ministry is yours. My job is to equip you for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But how do we rightly equip people to fulfill their God-given ministries? It's the Word.
Mm.
He has gifted some to be preachers, apostles, evangelists. So what's my job as a preacher or even an evangelist? To preach the Word.
Yeah.
Let the Word do the work to put people in aspects of ministry in all spaces and places.
Right.
Yes. To fulfill the work of the ministry. And Rick Warren, he said this is one of my favorite quotes. I'm not a huge fan, but I'd love to sit with a guy, and just pick his brain, learn from him, because I think there's something valuable there. He said this, he said, people look at me as a used car salesman, but they look at you as a satisfied customer.
Mm.
So he even knew people within their community as a pastor looked at him as a used car salesman, but the people of the church, they would look at them as a satisfied customer.
Wow.
Which means a satisfied customer sells more cars for you than you do.
That's strong.
And so if
they see the change in your life,
100%,
the joy in your life, the peace in your life, the forgiveness in your life, the change, the transformation, the freedom from addiction, the freedom from unforgiveness, whatever it is, that you're different on the sideline.
Oh, yeah.
That you're different at work.
So one of the, we say it within, Forge aspect, you hear it a lot. I preach it a lot, regardless if you're a plumber, if you're an electrician, if you're a business owner, I've got some guys that are concrete guys, and you name it, regardless
those are our
of
people.
A teacher, whatever. People need to view you as a disciple of Jesus Christ, disguised as a plumber, as an electrician, as a carpenter, as a business owner, as a concrete guy.
Say that again. That my vocation is my disguise.
That's it. My vocation is my disguise to be a disciple of King Jesus.
Huh.
And so
even as a preacher,
100%.
I am a follower of Christ disguised as a preacher.
But I don't even tell people I'm a preacher, John.
No, me neither. I try to keep that quiet.
I had it happen in an airport yesterday, and they said, "What do you do?" I went, "Man, I'm in business." But because
it's true, you own 6 Mile. Yeah.
Because if I tell somebody I'm a preacher, I've only had it done once. I went, I'm not even gonna shoot. I'm just gonna tell them what I am.
Yeah.
You know, I tell them I'm something else. I'm a business owner. Hey, me and my family, own and operate a something or business, or we own a camp or something.
Yeah.
Whenever I was bivocational, I would say, hey, I work for Entergy, which is a utility company that I work for. And I would tell them something, but I would never tell them that I was a preacher, especially when I was in the workforce, because I led more people to the Lord, taking them to lunch, but being a bivocational pastor than I ever have been in full-time ministry.
That's awesome.
And so I would tell people, don't tell nobody. That knew I was a preacher, don't tell nobody. Yeah. Well, guess what happened? Rumor got out at work.
Oh, really?
That I was a preacher, and people didn't even want to go to lunch with me anymore.
Wow. Yeah. So. But what a powerful way to view your life is I'm a student, but that's just my disguise. I'm a follower disguised as a student. I'm a follower disguised as a baseball player. I'm a follower of Christ disguised as an optometrist or whatever it is.
Which I need to go see.
Yeah, which you might need to go see. You're having a little struggle with
my
your
eyes.
No, this has been good, man. Thank you so much for sharing all these things. Man, I'm fired up, not just for when this podcast comes out, because I think it's going to help some people, but I'm fired up for this weekend. I mean, I can feel the energy in you. You're ready to preach right now. We still got a few hours before the first session, but thanks for coming on. Again, you were on 166. This is 182, another one in the tank. I've got a feeling you're going to be on the podcast again.
Let's go.
Yeah.
I love this.
We're dreaming about, I don't know if I can say this out loud, but I'm going to, because it's our podcast and we'll do whatever we want. But we're dreaming about a podcast within the Tab podcast family of podcasts that has just an outdoors track. And Adam Ray's been pushing this real hard, and it's got some legs where we'll talk about hunting, we'll talk about fishing, we'll talk about food plots and all those, because there's a whole other area of your life that we hit on number 166 in your previous life with training dogs, retrievers, that type of stuff. And but you were just a follower of Christ, disguised as a dog trainer. That's awesome. So, thank you. Tabernacle family, we want to thank some other people. Don't forget to support Yukon River Knives. You have a Yukon River knife. Yes, you do.
I sent you and Adam he sent me one after the 166 podcast, and anyway, I sent y'all a picture. I had a limit of ducks and a deer on a skinning shed, and I said, putting it to use.
Yes, and it worked well?
It worked great.
Yeah, that's good. So don't forget Yukon River Knives. If you look them up on the interwebs, the sales there support Alaskan Inland Missions. Trace Cakes. We love Trace Cakes. You don't know Trace Cakes. You might get some this weekend. I'm not sure. But she makes fantastic concoctions that will blow up your commitments around dietary issues because they are delicious and full of calories.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Maybe we'll get some Trace Cakes this Sunday. And then if this podcast has been helpful to you, if you'll share it with somebody, share it online, share it. You can do, man, I figured out how to do the copy to the link and then send it in a text to somebody. I love it when someone does that for me because then I don't have to go hunt for it. And, I'm a podcast guy on the road trips. I don't know if you do that kind of stuff, but I've got a couple I want to send you. But thank you again for being here. Thanks for coming all the way up. You brought warm weather with you. It's going to be 70 degrees the next 2 days. But then there's a rumor you're going fishing with our own Matt Stevens on Sunday afternoon, and it's going to be cold.
It's going to be cold.
So, and I know you didn't pack warm stuff, so we got some bogs for you.
Let's go.
Maybe we'll hammer some steelhead. So until next time, Tab family, this is Jonathon Sherwin, our producer, Benjamin Vermilia, back in the captain's chair, and me, John, signing off.